Chapter 7. November 8, 1876, day after the election. The morning after Election Day, at around 9 a.m. inside the Tilden mansion, Mary is seated at the dining room table having a light breakfast. She beams with delight when Samuel enters the room and walks to the table. He seats himself in a chair and a butler walks over to him and pours him a cup of coffee. Mary cheerfully says to her brother,
"Good morning, Mr. President. That was some party last night. What time did you finally get to bed?"
Samuel smiles and responds,
"It was late sometime after 2. And not to correct you, dear sister, I'm the president-elect."
"A mere technicality," she quips. Samuel takes a sip of his steaming cup of coffee then responds, "Many preparations need to be made and I'll be in need of your assistance." Mary takes a slice of toast, butters it and hands it to Samuel. She scolds, "Don't overdo it or you'll get yourself sick. You know how easily you catch colds." Mr. Smith, Tilden's personal and confidential secretary assistant George Smith enters the room with a clear sense of purpose on his face. He along with John Bigelow and Andrew H. Green are Tilden's most trusted custodians of his work. Tilden empowered them to burn and destroy any of his letters, papers, or other documents, whether printed or in manuscript, which in their judgment would answer no useful purpose to preserve. Without saying a word, George Smith walks to Samuel and hands him a few telegraph wires. In no rush to read them, Samuel invites Smith to have breakfast with him and Mary. "Good morning. Please, take a seat and join us." With a courtesy nod to Mary, Smith sits in a chair and a butler walks over and fills Smith's cup with freshly brewed coffee. Mr. Smith is anxious and instructs Samuel, "You must review these." Noting the expression on Smith's face, Samuel begins to read the communications. Mr. Smith sits back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, and observes Samuel's expression as he read the wires. Mary, sipping her coffee, innocently asks, "Is there a problem?" Smith glances at her for a moment then looks back to Samuel. Not disturbed by the news, Samuel calmly asks, "Are there other newspapers reporting problems?" "So far none that I know of," Smith replies. "I was told that the managing editor John Reed from the New York Times is the culprit. He was at the Fifth Avenue Hotel late last night with W. E. Chandler from New Hampshire. An old friend of mine who manages the Fifth Avenue Hotel told me Reed was in the lobby after midnight with W. E. Chandler, the Republican from New Hampshire. He said they came to the front desk and asked for Republican Chairman Zach Chandler's room number, then rushed off to see him." Mary asks, "Are the Chandlers related?" "To my knowledge they're both from New Hampshire, but I'm not sure about family ties." Samuel places the telegrams on the table and resumes eating his breakfast as if nothing is wrong. Smith continues, "I haven't read the early edition of New York Times yet, but my friend thinks Reed is trying to cast doubt about your win." Samuel coolly replies, "None of them has the authority to change an election outcome, it's wishful thinking." Mary reaches over, picks up the telegrams and reads them. Samuel says to Smith, "We can visit headquarters after breakfast and ask if there's any need for concern." Smith pushes back his chair and stands, "I'll alert your driver to ready your carriage." After Smith walks out of the room, Mary says to Samuel, "The voters overwhelmingly elected you, not Governor Hayes." Samuel takes another sip of coffee and replies to Mary, "It's probably a last-ditch ploy by a Republican bias editor to create doubt about my win." Mary stands and walks over to her brother. Samuel grins and pats Mary's hand to comfort her. Lesser-known editors do this kind of thing as a ploy to pique interests to gain advertisers and sell nickel newspapers. The day before voters cast their ballots for Rutherford Hayes, he penned his thoughts in his diary. "A cold but dry day. Good enough here for election work. I still think Democratic chances the best. But it is not possible to form a confident opinion. If we lose, the South will be the greatest sufferer. Their misfortune will be far greater than ours. I do not think a revival of business will be greatly postponed by Tilden's election. Business prosperity does not, in my judgment, depend on government so much as men commonly think. But we shall have no improvement in civil service, deterioration rather, and the South will drift toward chaos again. Hayes walks out of his mansion toward the reporters and sizable crowd of his confused supporters. It's chilly, but these Ohioans are hoping to hear what Hayes says to the newsman. All eyes and ears are on Hayes, one of the reporters shouts to Hayes. The New York Times, along with several other papers that followed the headline, claims this race is not yet decided. Any comments, Governor? Hayes answers, yes, I've heard the rumors, though I think we are defeated in spite of recent good news. I am in the opinion that Democrats have carried the country and that Tilden has been elected. Another newsman asks, does that mean you are conceding the race, sir? Some of the supporters standing close by jeer at the question while a small group of Tilden fans wave their political signs and one shouts there's over 250,000 reason he should concede. More news reporters start to chime in asking questions simultaneously. Sir, answer the question. Are you conceding? What now, Governor? Wait, can you answer just one more question? Hayes, not yet wanting to confirm or deny his concession, waves to the crowd. Thank you all for your support. Hayes turns and walks away from the crowd back toward his house. Days later, Hayes writes in his diary, Saturday, November 11, 1876. The election has resulted in the defeat of the Republicans after a very close contest. Tuesday evening a small party assembled in our parlor were here and not happy with the news. General Mitchell and Laura, our boys, Birch and Webb, Governor Dennison, a reporter of the Chicago Tribune, Mr. Huntley, W. K. Rogers, Rutherford Platt, and a few others at times including Emily Platt, Dr. Fullerton, and Fanny. We all felt that the state of New York would decide the contest. The last dispatches from our committee in New York were very encouraging, full of confidence. Mr. Cornell, Chairman New York State Committee, said in his experience of 10 years he had never seen prospects brighter on the eve of an election. But we all knew, and were warned about the enormous registration in the cities of New York and Brooklyn and other facts that we must not count confidently on carrying the state. The good omen from Ithaca was accepted with a quiet cheerfulness. Almost at the same instant came a gain of 36 in Ballville, the township nearest my own home. This was good. Then came, one at a time, towns and precincts in Ohio. The comparison was made with the vote in 1875. This was confusing and soon we began to feel that Ohio was not doing as well as we had hoped. The effect was depressing. I commanded without much effort my usual composure and cheerfulness. Lucy felt it more keenly. Without showing her depression, she busied herself about refreshments for our guests, and disappeared. I found her soon after Abed with a headache. I comforted her by consoling talk. She was cheerful and resigned but did not return to the parlor. Without difficulty or much effort I became the most composed and cheerful of the party. Early p.m. or thereabouts, we heard that in some 200 districts of New York City, Tilden had about 20,000 majority, which indicated 50,000 in the city. The returns received from the rural districts did not warrant the belief that they would overcome such a large city majority. From that time and forward, I never supposed there was a chance for Republican success. I went to bed between 12 to 1 o'clock. Talked with Lucy, consoling her with such topics as readily occurred of a nature to make us feel satisfied on merely personal grounds with the result. We soon fell into a refreshing sleep and the affair seemed over. Both of us felt more anxiety about the South, about the colored people especially, than about anything else sinister in the result. My hope of a sound currency will somehow be realized, civil service reform will be delayed, but the great injury is in the South. There the amendments will be nullified, disorder will continue, prosperity to both whites and colored people will be pushed off for years. But I took my way to my office as usual Wednesday morning and was master of myself and contented and cheerful. During the day the news indicated that we had carried California. Soon after, other Pacific states, all New England except Connecticut, all of the free states west except Indiana, and it dawned on us that with a few Republican states in the South to which we were fairly entitled, we would yet be the victors. From Wednesday afternoon the city and the whole country has been full of excitement and anxiety. People have been up and down several times a day with the varying reports. Wednesday evening on a false rumor about New York, a shouting multitude rushed to my house and called me out with rousing cheers. I made a short talk, saying as reported by the papers, "Friends. If you will keep order for 1/2 minute. I will say all that is proper to say at this time. In the very close political contest, which is just drawing to a close, it is impossible, at so early a time, to obtain the result, owing to the incomplete telegraph communications through some of the southern and western states. I accept your call as a desire on your part for the success of the Republican Party. If it should not be successful, I shall surely have the pleasure of living for the next year and a half among some of my most ardent and enthusiastic friends, as you have demonstrated tonight." From that time, the news has fluctuated just enough to prolong the suspense and to enhance the interest. At this time the Republican schemers are falsely claiming the election by one electoral vote. With Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, we have carried 185 electoral votes. This creates great uneasiness. Both sides are sending to Louisiana prominent men to watch the canvassing of the votes. All thoughtful people are brought to consider the imperfect machinery provided for electing the president. No doubt we shall warned by this danger provide, by amendments of the Constitution, or by proper legislation, against a recurrence of the danger. It's now mid-morning, the day after the election, and Zach Chandler is standing with John Reed and W.E. Chandler inside Republican headquarters. The three men are reviewing telegrams and responses from Republican leaders across the country. Several campaign workers busy themselves in the room, shuffling paperwork and chatting amongst themselves. Reed looks to Zach and remarks, "Several newspapers across the country are questioning the New York Times page 6 short article written by Reed. Unsure they will question whether Hayes may have won the presidency by electoral college votes." Pleased by this information, Zach replies to Reed, "Florida messaged a favorable response to the wire you sent last night." Delighted, Reed smiles, "Any response from South Carolina and Louisiana?" Zach hands over the wires from the two states and says, "The same, favorable." Reed takes a moment to review them. "And the western states? Are any stating Republican majorities as well?" If confirmed, Hayes is assured a majority in the Electoral College. One vote in the electoral is all that is needed to take the presidency from Tilden. With 19 now in question, your scheme to overturn the election might just work. Well done, Mr. Reed. Over at the Democratic headquarters, Tilden and Mr. Smith, along with his two bodyguards, make their way through the crowd of well-wishers. Samuel greets them with enthusiasm and shakes hands with several people before entering the building. Inside the campaign headquarters, John Bigelow, Congressman Hewitt and William Pelton are reviewing the returns as Samuel and Mr. Smith enter the room. Noting his arrival, William walks up to his uncle visibly upset and says, "A friend of mine from the Times reported back to me that Reed, one of the managing editors of the New York Times, is behind this. Heard several others there are not happy about it." Samuel frowns, "So I've heard from another source." William continues, "My source claims he was in the editorial room when Reed received a dispatch from Senator Barnum asking him to confirm the results." John Bigelow steps up beside the agitated William and says, "This is obviously a combination of Reed's bitter partisanship combined with a gambler's wish. The Republicans desperately want to steal this election from you." Samuel calmly replies, "They cannot steal a voter's majority. The laws of our Constitution will conclude the result, not any fictions Republicans cook up." What are Democratic leaders of the disputed states reporting? Standing a few feet away, Hewitt declares, "Louisiana reported and confirmed we have defeated Hayes by some 20,000 votes." Samuel takes a moment before responding, "We must not mislay our focus. We need confirmation. Let's begin by wiring all our party leaders at once. He pauses again and commands, please cipher the wires. There is no need to let anyone know outside of this room what we are communicating. He pauses again for just a moment. My nephew and I have a few other obligations to attend to. A slight smile crosses Samuel's face. Mary wants us there to assist with preparations for the festivities she's planned for this evening, or, Samuel looks directly at his nephew William, or, you and I will have to answer to your mother. Samuel announces to everyone in the room, hope to see all of you later at my house. Mr. Smith, are you coming back to Gramercy or staying here? Smith answers, with you, my work is at the house. Meanwhile, back at the Gramercy mansion, Mary and her staff are busying themselves prepping for her brother's victory celebrations. Mary is a superb hostess and will cover every detail. It's why Samuel wants her at the White House with him instead of a new bride. Mary is his older and only sister. She's family and he trusts her judgment same as he did their father. She's a fierce protector of his health issues that have caused him problems since he was a young child. Samuel, dressed in his formal attire, walks out onto the porch with his sister Mary and both welcome their guests filtering through the crowd up the stairs. Samuel declares, I think I'm going to take a few minutes and talk to some people out here before the merriment begins inside. Not too long. Mary counters. And tempting as it may be, please don't invite more people in. The room is already filled and cannot comfortably fit any more people other than the ones invited. Samuel kisses her on the cheek and walks down the steps. Mary enters the brownstone and stands just inside the entry hall, so that she can continue to greet the arriving guests and at the same time, through the open door, keep a protective eye on her brother as he works the crowd. Learning their lesson from the previous days concerning crowd control, there is a roped-off area so that the carriages can come and go to drop off passengers safely. There are hundreds of people waiting to congratulate Samuel and he is taking great pleasure in the attention. The curious spectators are respectful and peaceful as he greets and shakes hands with them. The mood of the crowd is upbeat. It's a surreal experience for Samuel. He realizes, I have won the hearts of these people, regardless of other news they have read stating otherwise. Meanwhile, many of Tilden's supporters continue to hold up their campaign signs while others wave their hats and handkerchiefs. There are also several reporters present, including John Reed, standing closer to the mansion. Most of them have easy access to Samuel as he works through the crowd. As the invited guests for the victory party arrive dressed in formal attire, Samuel figures they'll enjoy the publicity and waves several over to him. Reporters call out to Samuel, Governor, this is a victorious moment for you as president-elect, any comment for our readers? Samuel acknowledges their questions with a wave of his hand but continues to walk through the crowd to shake hands with his supporters. For a brief moment, he catches the glare of John Reed's eyes. Quickly turning, he doesn't let on that he saw Reed, and continues his meet and greet session. Meanwhile, the parade of horse and carriages arrive and halt just long enough to unload famed passengers. The invited guest list is made up of upper-crust Gilded Age high society people of old money and new. Many flocked to New York City to make their fortunes and names for themselves after the Civil War. The guest list for Tilden's victory party included a mix of theatrical actors, actresses, artists, musicians, wealthy bankers, lawyers, justices, politicians and business tycoons. Men of high position and wealth dressed in their best attire with ladies of high society, married and unmarried dressed in elegant designer bustled gowns, tightly cinched at the waist with long sleeves. Women dressed elegantly for evening events such as this with their long hair styled up and adorned with expensive jeweled pins to keep their locks in place. Governor Tilden wasn't much of a socializer, he'd enjoy a good dinner in an expensive restaurant with friends, then would head home. His preference was his office either to work on improving legislation, the laws and reading books about farming, architecture and especially new sciences. He enjoyed talking and sharing knowledge with people from all walks of life. His library was filled with expensive collections of rare books he'd consume. He'd go to the theater, concerts, art galleries and evening events but didn't enjoy them as much as learning. Women vying for his attention would often complain after dinner when finding him nodded off in a chair. After spending time chatting and thanking his supporters, Samuel worked his way back through the crowd to the steps of his mansion. As he neared the top stair, John Reed shouted out to him, "Governor, what about Republican Chairman Chandler's claims you're shy of electors' votes? Isn't it a bit soon for a victory party?" The crowd boos Reed's questions. Samuel stops, turns around and stares directly at Reed for a brief moment, then holds his arms in the air to quiet the crowd. Samuel looks toward Reed and then back to the crowd. "My election victory was due to the issues. I received a great number of votes from both Democrats and some Republicans. My victory was decided by the people due to my record as reformer governor successful in jailing criminals who robbed millions of their tax dollars. The hardworking people across this nation deserve an efficient government and political leaders who have their best interests in mind, not their own." The crowd applauds and cheers Tilden, who continues, "The opposition I had to overcome, well, I am pleased to say their ballots elected me by over 254,000 votes. It is an honor for me to be their president and public servant. As you can see, many guests have arrived and I must go inside." Samuel looks over at Reed with an upward tilted head displaying pride and confidence. Tilden, using body language instead of more words, shrugs his shoulders at Reed then holds his arms in the air in victory. The crowd reacts with loud cheers and chant Tilden's name while waving their campaign signs, hats and handkerchiefs. Samuel bows to his supporters then gently pats his chest over his heart as a sign to thank the people. The crowd loudly roars their approval. Reed angrily clenches his jaw. Mary, who has been watching and listening to the verbal exchange, steps through the open door onto the porch and casually says to her brother, "Your guests inside are elated by your words." Now that she realizes who John Reed is, she casts a glare of contempt at him which makes Reed uncomfortable, and he lowers his eyes as if he was a misbehaved child just scolded by his mother. Samuel turns to his sister and says, "Temper Mary." Through gritted teeth Mary proclaims, "He's a no-good diddler." Samuel kisses her cheek, gives her his arm to escort her into the party. "Shall we?" When they enter the room filled with friends and family, the orchestra stops playing and their guests loudly applaud and cheer them. The orchestra waits for the applause to slow down and begins to play a dancing waltz to get people on the dance floor to lighten the mood.